So, Guten Morgen. If you would like, you can follow along. The Discovery Church Wi-Fi password is Discovery with a capital D and a capital Y. The rest are lowercase. We put this on YouVersion, so if you have YouVersion, you can find it under Events. And that'll make it so that you guys can follow along, find the verses, because I'm not going to be using all from the same translation today. So anyway, if you'd like that, you can certainly do that. One of the things that we do is we're starting a new series. We started this last week. Is we go through a verse. We try and learn something, memorize something. And so the one that we're working on today, or this series, is from Proverbs chapter 3, 5 through, anybody know? 8. Gave you extras. All right, so if you want to take it and say it with me, go ahead. You just say it right up here. It's on the screen. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. And I would strongly encourage you work on that, like learn that one. Even if you're think you know it, like I keep getting it wrong because I learned it in a different version. So I'm having to work on it too. Say that again. All your ways acknowledge Him. He will direct your paths. That was mine. Yeah, submit. Exactly. And another one. Yeah, there's a bunch of them, all right? So we're talking about money, but not just particularly money. We're talking about what do we trust in? And, last week we talked about usually a lot of times we just trust in me. I trust in myself. I know better. I'm the smartest one. And so some of us trust in me or myself. Today we're actually going to talk about people who trust in money. Next week we'll talk about people who trust in various methods and ways of doing things. And then all of this is leading up to the 10th where we're going to have a family picnic or whatever. You guys are all welcome to join us. It'll be in the evening on the 10th out at Lonnie and Bryant's. We'll be cooking food. If anybody wants to get baptized, let me know because there's a lake there and we're going to do it. It might be a little muddy, but that's okay. So anyway, this week we're talking about money in particular. And I heard a story about a guy, fisherman. And he had gone out fishing and he came back in and he was just chilling on the shoreline. And a rich guy, a very rich investor guy comes alongside and he looks at him and he goes, "Why aren't you out there fishing?" The guy says, "Because I caught enough fish for the day." He goes, "But why don't you catch more fish? Then you can make more money. And then you could buy a bigger boat. And then you could get more nets. And you could catch even more fish. And then you could be rich like me." "And then what would I do?" He goes, "Well, then you could relax and enjoy life." It's kind of what I'm doing. Now, some of us, we think like the rich guy. If we just had a little bit more, if we just worked a little bit harder, if we just got a little bit more stuff, then we'd be able to relax. Some of us, we live as though we have enough. And I don't really need any more. It's all I need. Kind of like I showed last week with the jerk. That's all I need. My ashtray, my remote, my paddle game, and I don't need anything. I need this. Which, by the way, it's a funny movie. But if you're taking notes, I want you to write a couple things down. We're going to go through this relatively quick today because it's nothing that you haven't heard before for the most part. I'm not teaching you anything new. There's nothing new under the sun. But write this down. More money may help some. That's true. More money may help some. But faithfulness will help more. And so if all you're after is more money, it might help some. It might help you get a nicer car, a nicer house, or whatever it is that's on your wish list. That's great. Might help some. But faithfulness in what you've already got is going to help more. And if you've got, your Bible, you can look up these verses. I put the notes underneath so you can go and find them on your own. Proverbs 23, verses 4 and 5. I'm just going to give you a few of them that I picked out. Okay, and this is the New Living Translation. Here's what it says. Don't wear yourself out trying to get rich. Be wise enough to know when to quit, like the fishermen. In the blink of an eye, wealth disappears, for it'll sprout wings and fly away like an eagle. I'm going to tell you some stories a little bit later. Proverbs 28:20 and 22. Here's what this says. The trustworthy person will get a rich reward, but a person who wants quick riches will get in trouble. And anybody, you may know somebody like this who's always trying to find the next get-rich-quick thing. And they're always, hitting you up. I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. Okay, now there are legitimate jobs out there and all kinds of businesses, and even Amway is legitimate, all that kind of stuff. That's fine. But if your goal is just to get rich quick, it's probably not a good thing. Because the trustworthy person will get a rich reward, but a person who wants quick riches will get into trouble. Verse 22, greedy people try to get rich quick, but they don't realize that they're headed for poverty. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, 10 to 15. Here's what this says. Again, New Living Translation. I just liked how this one was speaking today. Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. So what good is wealth, except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? People who work hard sleep well, whether they eat little or much. But the rich, they seldom get a good night's sleep. There's another serious problem I've seen under the sun. Hoarding riches harms the saver. So it's not just going to get money, but once you get money, hoarding it, it harms the saver. Money is put into risky investments that turn sour and everything is lost. And in the end, there's nothing left to pass on to one's children. We all come to the end of our lives as naked and empty-handed as on the day we were born. We can't take our riches with us. And you've heard that before. You never seen any hearse pulling a U-Haul, that kind of stuff. I heard a story about an old man who was really rich, and he told his wife, promise me when I die that you will bury me with my money. It's like, what? And he had a lot of money. And so the funeral comes, and the caretaker, the mortician guy, sees the wife go up there, and she puts just this tiny little envelope into the casket before it gets closed. And he'd heard about this. And so he asks her afterwards, he goes, okay, I know that Edward asked you to make sure that he was buried with all his money, but I saw that you only put in a tiny, just a little envelope. Why was that? He goes, well, I wrote him a check. Yeah, you can't take it with you. All right. I know. It's just lame. It's a groaner. And then 1 Timothy chapter 6, this talks about money and how we love money and how we should handle money and even what the rich should do with their money. I'm just going to read it to you. 1 Timothy chapter 6, 6 through 11. But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich will fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced to themselves with many pangs. And just so you know, the love of money is the root of all evil. Money is not evil. If you think it is, you can give it to me. Okay? Money's not evil. It's not righteous, but it's not evil. And then, if you're rich, if you just happen to be rich, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share and store up treasures for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they might take hold of that which is truly life. Okay, now I just gave you maybe 6 verses or 6 little passages or something on money. There's over 2,000 of them. So if the Lord talks about money that much, it's probably something important. If you're already uncomfortable because you're in church and we're talking about money and you think I'm going to pass the bucket until it's full, it's not going to happen. Okay? Why? Because that's not the issue. Here's what it is. You write this down too. Money management is a spiritual issue. And if we're going to talk about spiritual things, then we need to talk about how to handle money, because it's a spiritual issue. And Jesus tells a story about that. He tells a story about handling money. Actually, he tells more than one. We're just going to look at one of them, though. And it's one of those that it's very confusing to people a lot of times because it doesn't really seem to make sense. They might think that it's a little bit odd. I don't think it is. I think, there's a possibility that we don't understand it completely, but I also think there's a very easy, simple explanation. And so if you've got your Bible, turn Luke chapter 16. Luke chapter 16, 1 through 13. Okay? Now I'm just going to read it to you. He also said to the disciples, this is Jesus talking, there was a rich man who had a manager. He's telling a story. There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. So the rich man had a manager. The manager's wasting. Verse 2. He called him, and he said to him, what is this I hear about you? Turn in an account of your management. You can no longer be my manager, which makes sense, right? If somebody's not doing a good job and they're just wasting your stuff, you tell them, I'm not going to keep you on staff anymore. So that's what he does. Well, in verse 3, the manager said to himself, what am I going to do since my master's taken the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'm going to do, so that when I'm removed from management, people might receive me into their houses. So summoning his master's debtors, all the people who owed the master money, one by one, he said to them, how much do you owe my master? The guy said, 100 measures of oil. And he said, take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. He said, well, all right, take your bill, write down 80. Now here's the part that confuses people, and we'll get to it in a second. In verse 8, the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in the dealing with the generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they might receive you into eternal dwellings. Like, what in the world? The master knew that he was a cheat. He goes out and he cheats more, and the master says, good job. That doesn't make any sense. We'll get to that. Verse 10. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in very much, and one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you've not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to true riches? And if you've not been faithful in that which is another's, who's going to give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters. Either he's going to hate one and love the other, or he's going to be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So, obviously, we've got a problem. Jesus is talking about a problem. The problem isn't the story, it's just a story. There's a manager who's got a dishonest, who's dishonest, and the master's like, this can't be. And so you're going to get fired, and the dishonest manager goes and is more dishonest. Okay, well, that's a problem. Well, did you know, and if you think about it, that like money and how we handle it, we can pretty much break all of the 10 Commandments with it. So like if you're gambling and you lose, I've heard people say things that they shouldn't say. They've taken the Lord's name in vain. You know, if you have to work, and I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad deal, but if you don't take a break because you've just worked, 40 days in a row, well, then you probably maybe didn't remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And for you doctors, other people are forcing you to sin, so I guess maybe you get a pass. It's kind of like you're slaves, and that's their problem. Money. Problem. So, let's look here. Verse 1. He said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and the charges were brought to him that the manager was wasting his possessions. He's wasting them. And the guy understood that they weren't his possessions, because when he went and asked people, how much do you owe? He said, how much do you owe my master? Not how much do you owe me. I've told you the story before where Laura's dad, he was an electrical contractor, and he had people who didn't pay him his bills, and they were moving out of state, and he's like, look, here are the people who owe money, and if you can go and collect any of it, you can keep half. Like, hot digger. This is good. Because, there's like some guys out there owed $8,000. I'm like, I'm going to make me some money. So I get all, dressed up, and I put on a suit, and I act like I'm an attorney or something like this, and I show up with some papers, and I walk into these places. I'm like, hey, I'm here on behalf of S&J Electric, and I hear that you owe some money, and when were you planning on paying that? Otherwise, I got some papers I need you to sign. Yeah, I'm 18, by the way. Okay? I'm 18. But I got money. But it wasn't all my money. We made a deal. Like if I made $200, I didn't keep all the $200. I gave $100 to her dad. If I got $1,000, I didn't keep the whole $1,000. I gave $500 to her dad because it wasn't my money. Well, this manager, he knows it's not his money. How much do you owe my manager? Or how much do you owe my master? How much do you owe my master? So what they're basically saying, look at verse 9 here. This little section, I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth. So again, money's not the problem. Money's not righteous. Love of money is the problem. Make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. He's telling them to This is Jesus' summary right here, right? He's told the story, say, make friends with this unrighteous wealth. Use money, don't let money use you. So, what's the problem? What is the problem that this manager had? It's the problem that we all have with not just our money, but our time and our relationships and our gifts and all that kind of things. We're not faithful. And so the problem is that we are unfaithful with the things that we've been given. And so if you've got $2 in your pocket or $200 in your pocket or 200 grand sitting in a retirement account, if you're not faithful with it, that's a problem. It doesn't matter how much you have. So I was looking for somebody who, had a lot of money, and I found this story. Has anybody ever heard of somebody named Hetty Green? Anybody ever heard of her? I hadn't either. Anybody ever heard of the Witch of Wall Street? That's what they called her. Okay, because when she was about 30 years old, her dad died. And he left her an inheritance that in today's funds and money would be about $100 million. That's a lot of money. But she was a shrewd money manager. She was a miser. She would not spend it. It drove a wedge between her and her husband and her kids. Like, it was said that she was known for carrying around and eating cold, uncooked oatmeal because it was economical. That she would only wash the hem of her dress, what dragged on the ground, because that way she could save on soap. Literally, people remember her smelling. She didn't like to take showers or anything. She just had a lot of money. And she was very smart with it. And so she made lots of money. But she was so stinking cheap that when her son one time broke his leg, she took him to a free medical clinic. And when they didn't set it right or do whatever right, she was like, I could treat him at home. And she took him home. And before long, it was probably, 6, 8 months. I don't know the whole story. I didn't look it up. That wasn't that important to me. But I did find and confirm that this woman right there took her son home from a free clinic with a broken leg, and before long, they had to amputate it. Because she wouldn't spend her money. When she died, how much do you think she was worth in today's money? Just guess. Just somebody throw out a number. How much? More. Not $100 billion. That'd be amazing. $4 billion. This woman right there, this stinky old lady, no lie, honestly stinky old lady, because she didn't like soap, turned $100 million into what? $4 billion. And that was in the 1800s. That's today's equivalent. Was she faithful? See, because a lot of times we think, it's only poor people that are unfaithful because they always spend their money. People who are constantly, hey, man, can I borrow a few bucks? Can I borrow a few bucks? Man, I can't pay this, I can't pay that. Well, you're not very faithful. You need to, budget your money. That's what we think. That's not the case. She was just as equally unfaithful because hoarding is unfaithfulness. Just as equally unfaithful. And that's the problem. If we want and gather too much and we don't do anything to invest it, and it's just for me, and it was really only for her. She wouldn't even save her son's leg. That's being unfaithful. And if we constantly spend it and throw it around and we don't plan and we don't prepare and we don't have an understanding that, hey, I do need to take care of some things. I need to pay off my bills. I need to make sure that I have enough for this before I buy that. That's also being unfaithful. That's the problem. Money's a spiritual matter. Money management's a spiritual matter. And Hetty was a perfect example of somebody who was unfaithful and demonstrated the problem the same way as this money manager did. He was unfaithful. It wasn't his money to do what he did with. It wasn't his money. He couldn't say, how much do you owe? Oh, okay, well, make it half. How much do you owe? Okay, write down a little bit less. That wasn't his money. He was unfaithful. That's why he was going to be fired. That's what he continued to do. He was unfaithful with little, will be unfaithful with much. That's how the story goes. So, go on to the last part of this, where we read verses 10 to 13. One who's faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. One who's dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. And then, if then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who's going to entrust you with true riches? And if you haven't been faithful in that which is another's, who's going to give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters. He's either going to love one or hate one and love the other, or he's going to be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And so this is what Jesus is giving as the solution to the problem that he just created. This is the solution. And you'll notice that the solution is kind of an either-or. It's an if-then. It's not a both-and. In other words, you can't choose both. Now, does that mean that you can't be both? Can you be faithful and rich? Yeah. Can you be rich and unfaithful? No. So you have to choose. You have to choose to be faithful, or you can choose to be rich. But if you choose to be faithful, there's a good chance that God will provide for you all of the things that you need. And I'm not just talking money. So, what's the solution? Be faithful with what you've got. I don't know what you've got. I don't know what you have in your bank account. I don't know what you have in your pocket. I don't know what you have in your wallet. But you're called to be faithful with what you've got. I don't know how much time you have. I don't know what you do with your time. But you need to be faithful with what you've got. I don't know what you're really gifted at and have an ability for. But you need to be faithful with what you've got. You don't just hide those things and keep them to yourselves. One of the things, like I know people who can sing and they can play instruments, but they would never stand up here and do it. Why? Well, because they're maybe a little bit scared. And in being scared, maybe a little bit, I'm not saying always, but maybe a little bit unfaithful. Because God's given you a gift that you could use to edify others, and you're choosing not to use it. I know people who have money, and when somebody calls or asks for money, and I'm not saying you have to give every time somebody calls or asks for money, but you're just like, I don't feel like it today. That's being unfaithful. So I'm not here to tell you what amount or anything like that. I'm just here to tell you that the solution to the problem of unfaithfulness is to choose to be faithful with what you've got. So I want to read you a story. How many of you have ever heard the story of the rich family at church? Okay? So I'm going to read it to you because it's that good. It's one of those that I heard a long time ago. It stuck with me. And it really kind of illustrates this point. You just have to be faithful with the little bit that you've got. It's by a girl named Eddie. It's a girl named Eddie, okay, just so you know. Eddie Ogan. And here's how it goes. She says, I'll never forget Easter 1946. I was 14. My little sister Osie was 12. My older sister Darlene was 16. We lived at home with our mother, and the four of us knew what it was to do without many things. My dad had died 5 years before, leaving Mom with 7 school kids to raise and no money. By 1946, my older sisters were married, my brothers had left home, and a month before Easter, the pastor of our church announced that a special Easter offering would be taken to help a poor family. He asked everyone to save and to give sacrificially. When we got home, we talked about what we could do. We decided to buy 50 pounds of potatoes, and we would live on them for 1 month. That would allow us to save $20 of our grocery money for the offering. When we thought that, if we kept our lights off, we'd save as much as possible, and we didn't listen to the radio, we'd save money on that month's electricity bill. Darlene got as many house and yard cleaning jobs as possible, and both of us babysat for everyone we could. For 15 cents, we could buy enough cotton loops to make 3 pot holders to sell for $1. We made $20 on pot holders. That month was one of the best of our lives. Every day we counted the money to see how much we'd saved. At night we'd sit in the dark and we'd talk about how the poor family was going to enjoy the money that the church would give them. We had about 80 people in our church. So we figured that whatever amount of money we had to give, the offering would sure be 20 times that much. After all, every Sunday the pastor was reminding everyone to save for this sacrificial offering. So the day before Easter, Ossie and I, we walked to the grocery store, got the manager to give us 3 crisp $20 bills and a 10 for all our change. We ran all the way home to show Mom and Darlene, and we never had so much money before. And the night we were so excited we could hardly sleep. We didn't care that we wouldn't have new clothes for Easter. We had $70 for the sacrificial offering. We could hardly wait to get to church on Sunday morning. Rain was pouring. We didn't own an umbrella. The church was over a mile from home, but it didn't seem to matter how wet we got. Darlene had cardboard in her shoes to fill the holes, and the cardboard came apart and her feet got wet. But we sat in church proudly. I heard some teenagers talk about the Smith girls having on their old dresses. I looked at them in their new clothes, and I felt rich. When the sacrificial offering was taken, we were sitting there on the second row from front. Mom put in the 10. Each of us put in a 20. As we walked home after church, we sang all the way. At lunch, Mom had a surprise for us. She bought a dozen eggs, and we had hard-boiled Easter eggs and fried potatoes. Later that afternoon, the minister drove up in his car. Mom went to the door, talked with him for a moment, and then came back with an envelope in her hand. We asked what it was, but she didn't say a word. She opened the envelope, and out fell a bunch of bills. There were 3 crisp $20 bills, 1 10, and 17 $1 bills. Mom put the money back in the envelope. We didn't talk. We just sat and we stared at the floor. We'd gone from feeling like millionaires to feeling like poor white trash. We kids had such a happy life that we felt sorry for anyone who didn't have our mom and dad for parents, and a house full of brothers and sisters and other kids visiting constantly. We thought it was fun to share silverware and see whether we got the spoon or the fork. We had 2 knives that we passed around to whoever needed them. I knew we didn't have a lot of things that other people had, but I never thought we were poor. That Easter day, I found out we were. The minister brought us the money for the poor family, so we must be poor. I didn't like being poor. I looked at my dress and my worn-out shoes, and I felt ashamed. I didn't even want to go back to church. Everyone there probably already knew we were poor. I thought about school. I was in the 9th grade at the top of my class of over 100 students. I wondered if the kids at school knew that we were poor. I decided that I'd quit school since I finished the 8th grade. That was all the law required at the time. We sat in silence for a long time, and then it got dark and we went to bed. All that week, we girls went to school and we came home and nobody talked. Finally, on Saturday, Mom asked us what we wanted to do with the money. What did poor people do with money? We didn't know. We never knew we were poor. We didn't want to go to church on Sunday, but Mom said we had to. Although it was a sunny day, we didn't talk on the way. Mom started to sing, but nobody joined in, and she only sang 1 verse. At church, we had a missionary speaker. He talked about how churches in Africa made buildings out of sun-dried bricks, but they needed money to buy roofs. He said $100 would put a roof on a church. The minister said, "Can't we all sacrifice to help these poor people?" We looked at each other and smiled for the first time in a week. Mom reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope, and she passed it to our Darlene, and Darlene gave it to me, and I handed it to Ossie, and Ossie put it in the offering. When the offering was counted, the minister announced that it was a little over $100. The missionary was excited. He had expected such a large offering from a small church. He said, "You must have some rich people in this church." Suddenly it struck us. We'd given $87 of that little over 100. We were the rich family. Hadn't the missionary said so? From that day on, I've never been poor again. I'll always remember how rich I am because I have Jesus. And I love that story, and I was going to tell it, and so I was looking it up. What I didn't know is the rest of the story. Like, that's an awesome story all by itself. But let me just show you Eddie and what Eddie learned. She married Phil. And they had 13 kids, 1 of their own, and 12 that were adopted. She remembers growing up and telling her mom, one of her favorite songs, "Jesus Loves the Little Children," red and yellow, black and white. They're like, I'm going to have all kinds of children. She does. Those are her kids. It's not even all of them. Her husband served in the war. They had 6 Korean kids. 2 of them were half black. 3 American Indian kids, 3 Caucasian kids, and 1 of their own. Eddie decided that she didn't know what to do because she was home with these kids and schooling. And when she went to church one time, she found out that there were about 40 missionaries. And she didn't have anything to give them. She was like, but maybe I can just write them. And so she hand wrote just letters, talking to them, telling stories, because she had plenty of them with 13 kids. And there was one particular missionary that wrote back from India. They'd just gotten there, and somebody who'd been in India for 30 years had just left, and they asked him, "Hey, what do you do? What do we need to do well in India as a missionary?" He goes, "You need to laugh every day. Find something every day to laugh about, or India will eat you up." And they're thinking, the dude's been here 30 years. He could probably give a little more advice, but they found out after he left and they were there that India really would eat you up. The missionary work was so hard, but then they get a letter from Eddie, and she's telling stories. They wrote back and said, every day we laugh. She told a story about false teeth one time. She wrote this letter about a friend of hers who had false teeth, but she didn't like them, so she'd keep them in her lap until she needed to use them. And they were eating one time, and she went to take and wipe off her mouth because she drank something, but the teeth went flying, and they went under another table, and so Eddie had to go climb and get this old lady's teeth, and she brings them back. And then they got in the car, and they went somewhere, and when she got out, they came out of the car. Like 3 different times in one day, she tells the story, and it makes missionaries laugh. Well, she started writing handwriting, and then wrote every single week or month for about 18 years. Used a church copy machine mimeograph until a new pastor came and then said, you can't use it anymore, it's only church business. And then she stopped for a little while. And this is them not too long ago. Okay? That's Eddie and Phil. And I'm just going to read, because this is the story that I found, what she said. Or at least what the story said. So now Eddie and Phil live as the rich family that they are. Social Security meets their needs. Any other money that they bring in, they turn around and send out again. The $1,000 they get for cleaning the grounds and bathrooms at fairs and rodeos buys copies of the Book of Hope, distributed to children and youth worldwide. Eddie's job as an agricultural surveyor contributes to projects such as shoes for orphans in Siberia, material to make rag dolls for orphans in Japan, and postage for her monthly letter. Eddie said, unless the Lord tells me to quit, I'm not going to quit right now. I quit for the wrong reasons to begin with. I didn't pray about it. I just quit writing letters. I expect to write every month until I'm dead or I have Alzheimer's. I firmly believe with all my heart that the Lord will provide whatever I need. So the solution isn't to have more money. The solution is to simply be faithful with what you've got. And when you are considered rich. So let's just unpack this real quick. Faithfulness is more important than money. We've said that. Look at verse 11. Verse 11. If then you haven't been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who's going to entrust you the true riches? If you have not been faithful with unrighteous wealth. Well, just so you know, I've already said it, but hey guys, money and wealth are not considered righteous. Now, I say that and you go, yeah, exactly. And yet at the same time, a lot of times we look at people who have more and think that they're more righteous. Well, they must be more righteous because they've got more. But that's not true. The stuff that you and I have been given on earth is not what makes us righteous. None of us are more righteous than another because of what we have. What it is, who's going to entrust you with true riches? Well, the spiritual riches are what we need. So let me just tell you what you have or what you can have. And this has nothing to do with money. This is the stuff that we've been given in Jesus. Spiritual riches are what we need, like Eddie has. 13 kids, Social Security, and thousands of missionaries that she's impacted over the years. And people like us that have been hearing this story for years since she first wrote it down. So what are those spiritual riches? Grace. You get all of God's stuff without having to pay for it. Mercy. You don't get any of the punishment you deserve for being a jerk because Jesus already took it. Hope. You get hope. Like you don't have to wish. You get hope. You don't have to wish that things are going to get better. You have hope because hope is going to be fulfilled because we also have faith. And that faith is a gift of God. We have love. Love is an action, but it's something that Jesus has actually given to us. For God so loved the world, for God so loved you, and you, that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have eternal life. You've been given that. That's spiritual richness right there. You've been given joy. And some of you don't have it, but it's available. Joy is something that can't be taken away. Even that family, like God restored their joy when they could give 4/5 of the offering to a missionary to put roofs on houses in Africa. And peace. Like this is a gift that a lot of us, we want more money because we think it'll give us more peace. Like we don't have to worry about what's going to happen. But Jesus is the one who gives us peace. We need the spiritual richness. And if we don't have that, unfortunately, you and I, when we are looking to something else to fulfill our needs, we become idolaters. I need more money, or I'm just not going to be happy. No, you don't. You need more Jesus. And more Jesus means more peace, and more love, and more hope, and more joy, and more faith, and more grace, and more mercy. Look at verse 12. If you've not been faithful in that which is another's, who's going to give you riches that are your own? Who's going to give you riches that are your own? Well, here's the question. And maybe not the question, it's just kind of the the statement I'm going to give to you. If you can manage faithfully what isn't yours, you can keep forever what is. I want you to think about this for a second. Many of you have played Monopoly before, right? You've had money, you've collected property, you've got hotels and all that kind of stuff. That's great. Doesn't mean anything. Yeah, it's yours. That's right. But you're not going to keep it because at some point you're going to put it all back in the box so you can play it another day. And those of you who were maybe reading along in our devotionals, do you remember where they were talking about in one of the YouVersion devotionals about bank tellers and operators, like a bank teller? Imagine a bank teller goes to work, looks at the cash in their drawer and says, "Mine." No. Or somebody who drives, a big truck or a road grader or something like that, and they've been working on it all day. One of Benny's employees, and they're laying down road. And he's like, "I've been driving it all day, it's mine." I think Benny would disagree. That's only a $100,000 piece of machinery. Somebody, you go in and you're looking at rings, or you're looking at jewelry at a jewelry store, and the pretty little girl back there, "Here you go," but the day's over, she's like, "Mine." It's not yours. But if you can be faithful with things that aren't yours and manage them faithfully, then the things that God gives you, guess what? You get to keep forever. You get to keep that peace and that joy and that love and that faith. You get to keep all of that forever. You get to keep eternal life forever. So there's a difference between this temporary management, which is what we're called to do, and the permanent possession, which is what Jesus is trying to give us. So if you choose faithfulness, you get something permanent. And here's the end of the story. No servant can serve two masters. Either he'll hate one, love the other, he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. I told you, he's laying it out. It's this or that. Me or them. Right or wrong. It boils down to this. You only have one choice. You can only make one pick. You can only choose one thing. And I understand nobody likes that, because if you've ever had kids and you've sat them down and you're like, put candy in front of them, you can have one. And they go, just like that. You've seen it. I've seen Autumn. Okay, we can test this afterwards too. Pick one. And even if they don't pitch a fit, I've watched them before. "Hey, Anthony, I've seen your kid. Ben," I say, "you can have one." And he'd take one, he'll go eat it, but then he'll come back and he'll get another one, and then he'll come back and get another one, and then he'll come back and get another. It's not your fault.
It's one in each hand.
Yeah, it's one in each hand, yeah. But you can only pick one. And so in those cases, Ben is choosing unfaithfulness. Just like we are sometimes. Just like Hannah, who's in the other room, right? Okay. Hannah's in the other room. Hannah wanted to sleep upstairs the other day. She asked me, I'm like, "No, you can't sleep upstairs. Go to bed." She comes downstairs, and the next thing I know, I hear her walking upstairs. And Laura's telling me, I told Hannah she could sleep upstairs. Like, "Oh, no, you didn't." Hannah tried to pick two parents. Hannah got in trouble. Hannah was unfaithful. So what are you doing with the stuff that God has given you? Are you choosing to focus on just that? Like, I can't afford to give. I can't afford to manage my money. I can't afford to give my time or my resources. I really don't feel like sharing this or that because, what happens if something breaks? Well, that's what we call life. And one of the most disappointing things that I've ever experienced here was when we first started this church, and I went to another church because they had tables and they weren't using them, and they were in the fellowship hall. I'm like, "Hey, we're doing an event. Can I borrow 2 tables? You got 20 of them here." "No." "Can I rent 2 tables?" "No." "Okay, can I ask why?" "Well, we've borrowed stuff out before and it comes back broken." You're a church. Borrowing to another church. Wanted to do a Bible study. It's $200 to buy a Bethmore Bible study. We didn't have that. Found out another church had it. "Hey, can we borrow this, Bethmore Bible study for like 13 weeks? The women want to do it." "No." "Really?" "Yeah, why not?" Well, people have lost the DVDs before. That's just, in my opinion, that's just being unfaithful. Which is why when we can meet in a place like this where Ignite is, and then they share this space with us, and we share stuff with them, and there's stuff that we don't have and other people don't have, and we give to them, and they give to us, and I can't tell you how many things, just technology-wise, that we've given away. We didn't even sell it. Why? Because that's what you do. You're faithful with the little bit that you've got. So here's your choice, guys. Here's some suggestions, okay? Count what you've got. Consider what you give. Confess if you keep. And then contribute what you should. I'll say it again so you can remember. Count what you've got. Consider what you can give. Confess if you've done it wrong. And then contribute what you can. Or what you should.